Okie dokie, and we are all set to go. Welcome, everybody. Fantastic. So good to see. What a popular session this has been. So yeah, nice to see you, Adrian. Hi.
Hi, Danielle. How are you doing?
Hi. If you haven't met me before, my name is Danielle Stein-Fairhurst. So I am a financial modelling specialist based in Sydney, Australia. My job is to bring together speakers and specialists on topics that are relating to financial modelling. And I'm very happy to be joined by Adrian Miric from South Africa here today. Before we go further, I'd like to just start the session with a welcome to country, which is to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I am on and on which we're meeting virtually today. So I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So welcome everybody and welcome to Adrian. I'm going to hand over to you, Adrian, and let you introduce yourself. I'm really excited about this topic because it is such an interesting one. I know that people, it's such a subjective thing, you know, whether you are advanced at Excel or people rate themselves very, very differently. And I'm really interested to hear what Adrian has to say about that. So I'll pass over to you, Adrian, and the microphone is yours.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Okay, so sorry, that's already run, so we'll go through this. Okay, so first things first, you're going to see there's a QR code. So as soon as I know you're all sitting there with your phones on them already, you may as well make use of them.
That's it.
So yeah, during the presentation, you'll see there's a couple of QR codes which will pop up where instead of you trying to jot down what I've said, you can point your phone at the screen, click on it, it'll open that relevant web page, and then you can maybe look at it a little bit later. So you're going to see a few places there, and I'll tell you what they refer to.
Fantastic. And I'll send out the links tomorrow as well, Adrian. I'll send an email.
Wonderful. Okay, great. So just to introduce myself, and again, if you want our social media links, there's the QR code. But just background, so my name's Adrian Miric. Background is I'm a chartered accountant. I did a little bit of an IT audit, and I got my CISA, did some corporate finance with a CFA. But for whatever reason, I just love Excel and spreadsheets. And so we've had sort of over 20 years of spreadsheet consulting and training experience. Quite interesting, I think quite important for this particular topic. I used to do a lot of financial model reviews, and we still do some of them. And for some reason, I actually quite enjoy doing the reviews. I enjoy finding the mistakes, but I actually enjoy understanding why did the mistake happen? How did it happen? And I think it's actually quite relevant to what we're talking about here, because we find that the errors people create sometimes actually indicates their skill levels. So it's quite an important thing. We are, the website is auditexcel.coza. And there was meant to be the dedicated skills assessment website was meant to be up and running by now, but unsurprisingly, it's not at the moment. So that will be coming. And at the end, you'll see you've got an ability just to get a reminder for it. So that's just an introduction of who I am. Just what we're going to cover. Okay, so the first thing is, does advanced Excel actually mean anything? So we're going to go through a few things. Oh, excuse that. Sorry about that. Does advanced Excel actually mean anything? Just a little bit more about us and maybe why the skills assessment we built was so important. A little bit more about our online skills assessment questionnaire. We've had about 35,000 assessments go through it, just some what we think are very interesting results out of it. And then probably the most important outcome is the question philosophy. So what questions have we found actually help us tell if someone's an advanced Excel user or not, and which ones actually don't work? They're a waste of time. And then towards the end, just the whole thing about what is your job function versus your Excel knowledge, because there is a little bit of people tend to treat Excel as maybe a little bit like Word, where if you know Excel, you know everything about Excel. And I don't actually think that's true. And in fact, it's very, very not true. Sorry, just making sure my phone's properly off. Okay, so what is advanced Excel? So in the last month, we've looked at a few adverts, and you'll see in Cape Town, someone is looking for a financial modeler, $35,000 per year. And in the wording, you see it says they're asking for advanced MS Excel skills. So that's fine. I expect that, financial modeler. In Gauteng, finance administrator, earning a third of that person, exact same wording. They need advanced Excel. So it doesn't quite make sense to us that those two people would be actually the same level of Excel. What about in the UK? Financial modeling executive, earning £45,000. So interesting enough, their description was some modeling skills would be useful, but not essential, as long as you have advanced Excel skills. So I do find that quite interesting. Accounts assistants, earning half of that, and you'll see they require knowledge of advanced Excel functions. So we just find it very difficult to understand how this is possible. How can the same description actually apply to all these people? We also get some training requests. So we've asked, please train 250 people in advanced Excel. Now in South Africa, there are very few companies that actually have 250 people who actually need advanced Excel firstly, and they are already at an intermediate level, in theory should go on an advanced Excel course. So there is a discrepancy here. The word advanced Excel there's no single definition as such. So just in terms of what we do and why the skill level became important. So we obviously do a lot of Excel consulting. So we build spreadsheets, sometimes financial models, but more and more we're doing actual management reporting and that type of thing. And we tend to hand these tools over to a client. But the skills assessment in particular was focused on the training we do in MS Excel. So we've got various levels, various topics. So obviously all the skill levels, beginner, intermediate, advanced, financial modeling, and then various specific topics, dashboards, etc. And the problem we were having is we needed to understand what skill levels are being sent to us. So that same company that said, can you train 250 people in advanced Excel? Then when we explained what the issue was, well, they then said, okay, there's 250 people, tell us which course they should go on. And here's what they think they are. So it became quite important. There's no way we can sit with 250 people and try and understand what their skill level is and where they must go. So the idea was to try and get an understanding quickly of what their skill level is. Or someone come, they've only got budget for a day of training. Please, can you take the staff, group them into like skilled individuals, and then give us some content. So again, extremely difficult to just cold say, okay, put these 10 people in a room and let's see what happens. And what we're finding is if people don't use our skills assessment, you get situations where they're on a VBA course, but they don't know how to do an if function. Or you've got a beginner and an advanced user. They're sitting in the same class, but they shouldn't be. Both are getting frustrated. In one case, we're going too fast. Other case, we're going too slow. So it did cause us.
I've seen that so often. It's really frustrating when that happens.
Correct. So we built this Excel skills assessment. So there's a QR code. If you click on it, it'll take you to the page. It's a free assessment. So if you want, just click on it, it'll stay on for a while. And you can then do it later if you want to look at it. But just a bit of background on it. 15 years ago, we built this skills assessment. The whole focus was allow individuals to see where they're strong and weak. So you'll see there's a couple of categories. Probably more important for us is the ability to compare people, to benchmark people. Because of this problem of what does advanced Excel mean, we discovered that actually we need the ability to say, here's a group of your people. This is how they compare to each other. Firstly, does that make sense to you? And you're going to see there is ability to cheat or guess, and therefore you can be rated higher than you should be. But does it make sense? Therefore, please put these 10 people in a class, those 10 people in a class, etc. This skills assessment was heavily focused on training, and you're going to see some of that come out. But we are, as I said, we've got this dedicated skills assessment site coming, where it's going to be a little bit more on the test side of it, as opposed to the training side of it. So just some of the key features of this skills assessment, which has developed over time. So it only has 20 MCQ questions across 4 skill categories. Okay, so we couldn't ask those 250 people to please answer this 100-question test to figure out where they belong. So we had to make it as short as possible, so 20 MCQ questions across the 4 skill categories. As a result, every question needed to count. And you'll see it explains why our question philosophy is so important. Because it's a training, it was more a training focus, there's always a don't know option. So we always required some honesty. If you don't know, please say don't know. Don't guess, because you could, even after doing the test, end up on an advanced course because you just guessed and you just got very lucky. So the don't know does imply some honesty. What's quite interesting about this is if you look at the questions themselves, you're going to see they often have multiple correct answers. Okay, and then we weight the scores depending on how you answer. So what's quite important to us, the question doesn't ask, how do you do something in Excel? It's how do you in particular, not what is the best way to do it, what is the correct way to do it, what does the financial modeling standards say you should do, how do you actually do it in Excel? And then based on that, based on our training experience, we then weight the scores. You'll see it generates a score out of 10. But for us, more importantly, it gives us a skill level. So you're a beginner to intermediate to advanced, or advanced. But it is not based on the score only. So that's quite important. The score is one thing, but you'll see we discovered a problem with the score only. And so we've had to come up with another way to do it. A little bit later, we'll go through it, but the skills assessments also included 20 optional questions. So you didn't have to complete them. And what they were trying to assess is, what do you actually do in Excel? What do you spend most of your day in Excel? More about this later, because it is actually quite important. So the scoring system, we started out and we just had a number. So you scored 5 out of 10, therefore you're intermediate. We realized that didn't work. It gave us quite a few false negatives and false positives. So we then developed these categories. And you'll see on the right-hand side, the categories we've come up with is there's fundamentals, there's using tools, using functions, and the super user attributes. And our question philosophy fits into all of these. Now, fundamentals is pretty much what it says. How do you start a formula, printing, saving, that type of stuff. Using tools then is using the buttons in Excel, anything in the ribbon. So it's a button that you push, remove duplicates, filter, pivot tables. Using functions, the VLOOKUP, if, etc. And the super user attributes are the ability to use those two together, to understand what is happening in Excel, to understand if there's an error, what happened, how did it actually come about? So the scoring, all the questions try and get a score for each of these categories. Now, what was also quite important is there's a clockwise logic to this. So in the ideal world, people should learn all the fundamental stuff. So they should know everything there. Then we think using the tools actually is the next step. We see it as Microsoft is giving you a bit of a wizard by pushing a button. So if you remember, before the remove duplicate button came, you could always do it. There's formulas you could use. There's ways to do it. And then they realized actually people are doing this so often. Let's give them a button, make it easier. There we go. So the next thing should be people get skilled in using the tools. Then they realize the tools don't really cover everything. So they start using functions. And then you have your super user attributes. So in our logic, your skills should increase clockwise. However, that's not the way the real world works, because what happens is someone's just a beginner, but someone has taught them parrot-like how to do a VLOOKUP, so they actually know a little bit of a function. So we decided that the shape actually tells us more about a person's skill level than actually just an absolute score. All the questions are out of 10, and the actual test was out of 10. And as I've said, it's not the score they get that matters, it's the shape of this curve. And that's why the question philosophy became quite important. So just to go through what the shapes are. So we find that people who are beginners generally score less than 3.5. And this is the shape we've decided works for a beginner. So their fundamentals is sort of halfway. They know a little bit of tools, a little bit less of functions, and some super user attributes. Now, what's quite important is based on this, someone can actually score a 4, 4.5, and we'd still rate them as a beginner because the shape is actually more important to us. Intermediate, scoring 3.5 to 8, and you'll see it slightly bigger, better fundamentals, better tools, better functions. And then advanced would look something like that. And they'd score above an 8. But again, it's possible to score an 8, and actually, because the shape looks a bit funny, we actually would rate you an intermediate or an intermediate to advanced. So just to explain that, this is a real score, the black line. So their black line scored 4.7. Okay, so it's a decent score, I suppose. But if you look at the shape, something's not right with those answer sets. You know, were they guessing? So how is it that their functions and super users are better than the fundamentals, for example? There's something not right there. So normally we would downgrade this, or we'd check with the manager and say, look, is this person actually as strong as we're saying or as weak as we're saying? What is scary, however, is that sometimes this is not wrong. Okay, so sometimes this is reality. Parrot fashion, they've learned, we happen to ask them questions that they happen to know, and so it looked better than they were, but their fundamentals, how do they start a formula, is wrong in our opinion. So it's just a warning, and hopefully gives us a better sense of, are they just able to follow instructions exactly, or do they actually understand Excel? Now, as I say, we've done 35,000 assessments. Now, just keep in mind, most of the people doing it are doing a course or trying to understand their own skill levels. We've noticed that because it's free, some recruitment companies seem to be using it, even though they maybe not understanding the risks of people, the ability to guess and actually score higher. But this is what the average of everyone is, the dotted black line. And you'll see it's actually quite close to what we said would be an intermediate. So you'll see their fundamentals quite good, tools almost spot on. Their functions are a little bit weaker than maybe we thought, but their super user attributes are a little bit stronger. So from our point of view, and it makes sense, the average user should be average or intermediate in our mind. Now, just interesting, out of this 35,000 assessments, we've got 9,000 that we were expecting to be a little bit more advanced. So they're all consultants, US and UK based, all university graduates. The one proviso was they have limited work experience. So they've sat and read a book. They've sat in a classroom and done perfect examples, not much real life experience. When you look at an average of their results, it's better, but actually not much better, not as much better as we would have thought, to be honest. So we did find that quite interesting. So just based on that first, before we go into the questions themselves, you know, based on, if you look at requests, job titles, that type of thing, there seem to be only beginners and advanced users in the world. Okay, so everyone, doesn't matter what job you're doing, they want an advanced skill. I suppose it's not surprising, but we've set up our questionnaire that intermediate is the average skill level we see. And actually, from a training point of view, intermediate is quite a nice sweet spot. You know, they've reached a tipping point, they can be trained, and now it's just pointing them in the right direction, making sure that they know what they need to know. It's should be fairly obvious, but everyone cannot be an advanced Excel user. It's like everyone being above average driver. It cannot be, mathematically just not possible. But we also think everyone does not need to be an advanced Excel user. So a lot of companies, they seem to be doing fine, and they think their users are advanced, and we'll show you a little bit later. Often that's not the case, but they want an advanced user, even though in our scoring, their current staff would be intermediate. So to me, advanced has no real meaning. It depends on peer comparison. So are you the person that everyone runs to in the company? Then you must be advanced. Are you running to someone else? They must be advanced. The marketing of courses also is a bit of a problem. Excel 3 or 4 is always assumed if you've attended it, you must be advanced. And I don't think that's always the case. You know, this word has been abused a bit. And then the type of work is important. So an advanced Excel user for financial modeling I think that's a different level than an advanced user in a finance department or a debtors department. And as a result, we had to build our own scoring system to have some sort of a common scale to be able to do it. So just before I go into the question philosophy, I don't know, are there any questions, comments?
Nothing. Yeah, just I think people are keen to find out what things they need to know to be considered advanced. And someone's asking about Python. Does an accountant or an auditor need Python? Do you have a view on that, Adrian?
So I love Excel. So Python, all of these are all wonderful. Yeah. But if you're heading that way, and even Power BI, I have this feeling on it. If you're heading this way, go do programming, study programming. For most people so keep in mind, maybe financial modeling, maybe I'm working with people just below that finance department. I think Excel is great. If you're going to do it seriously, do it properly. But otherwise, Power Query solves so many problems for us that, Python, all of them, they handle mass volumes of data. But for most people, and remember, this is a rating most people, do you really need it? It's nice. If you can do it, great. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that it's good to have, to know a little bit about Python, and if that's your interest, then, go and become get really good at it. But I think you might be missing a trick if you don't look at all the things that Excel has to offer, particularly as an accountant or an auditor. I think it's really important to make sure that you've covered everything in Excel.
I agree.
Another question here from Philip. Isn't it possible to define advanced according to the number of functions and capabilities that have been mastered rather than the knowledge versus your peers? That's interesting. So rather than actually say, what do you know, rather than how do you compare against other people? What's your view?
Yeah, so you'll see so one of the more controversial things I'm going to say later is just knowing every single function in Excel. I'm not sure if it helps you. It's a bit like, and I'll pre-warn you, I'm saying shortcuts to me are meaningless. Knowing every shortcut in Excel, rather don't go to an Excel course, take a memory course and just go learn that off by heart. I don't actually think it tells you. So that's I'm seeing as book learning. You know the function. Do you know where to use it, how to use it, what can go wrong with it? So a sheer number of functions. I think a lot of advanced people stick to a function and they just know it to death, and they know it so well and they get it right. So a lot of my focus is, what is the end outcome? Can you get the right answer? I'm quite averse, and you'll see when we get to the question philosophy, that I want to punish people because they didn't happen to do it my way, the way I've learned and so comfortable with that I don't do it the other way just because I know everything about it. So that's would be my answer there.
Yeah, a lot of good comments here about knowing Excel isn't the same as being able to build a model, and same with shortcuts. You can't, being able to rattle off a pile of shortcuts is not really going to help you that much unless you can actually use them and it helps you speed up your work.
Correct. Anything else? We can go into the question philosophy.
A couple of comments and questions. I think we probably keep going.
Okay. I'll look at them later. I can't see them at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So what we found was that our question philosophy was actually critical. And what we found surprising is the questions that actually showed skill level. Okay, so we came up with some brilliant questions, and I thought, this is brilliant. This will tell me, in fact, it'll be not a 20 questionnaire, it'll be a 1 questionnaire. Just answer this and you're right. And you realize actually it doesn't work like that. And then the questions that we thought we were just putting in because we needed a filler, actually, when we did a little bit of a, not scientific, but a sort of ad hoc correlation, certain questions just show skill levels better. So our whole focus, the whole question philosophy, is focus on whether they understand Excel, not whether they've read a book on Excel. Okay, so I don't really care if they know every single function in this case, they know all the shortcuts. Do they understand how Excel works? The issue with Excel is there's multiple ways to do anything in Excel. Okay, so the whole philosophy must be, don't punish someone because they didn't happen to use my way. And you can't have hundreds of questions. I cannot have a 100-question questionnaire and lots of questions just in case the person does or doesn't know that particular area. So the idea is to get as much out of a single question as possible. So firstly, in order to do that, there's often, if you look at our questionnaire, each question often has multiple right answers with their own weightings. Okay, and that's because there's often multiple ways to achieve the same thing. Again, our focus is asking them how they would do it, not what the correct answer is per some website. And this is where now it becomes quite important. So what we found is that we try to test people on what most people would know. So one of the problems you have is, so obviously match index is well loved, lots of abuse for VLOOKUP. But what we found is it's a bit of a problem because match index is not known by everyone. I would say VLOOKUP is the more commonly known one. And the match index person would probably know the VLOOKUP. The VLOOKUP person, they may be super advanced in VLOOKUP. So they may know partial VLOOKUPs, true, they know everything about it. They just haven't bothered to learn match index. So someone getting the match index wrong might mean they're weaker, or maybe they just haven't bothered to learn it. So we're quite careful about making sure that when someone gets it wrong, they got it wrong and they shouldn't have got it wrong. If they're advanced users, they should never get that wrong. And then we've weighted the scores as well. It's quite important. So actually, if you look at some of our questionnaires, the exact same question, it's got a different scoring in the advanced quiz versus the beginner quiz. Because some things we expect an advanced person to know. If they get it wrong, actually they get punished. Whereas in the beginner quiz, maybe that same question actually indicates some level of skill. And then within the questions as well, we actually have weightings, and some answers can be partially right. So just as an example, so this is a bit of a cheat if you do our skills assessment. The first question we ask is, how do you start a formula in Excel? Okay, and the answer options are at, plus, minus, equals, don't know. So every one of those can start an Excel formula. What we found though, is that how people started when we're in our training courses and we're walking around, how they actually start a formula is indicative of their skill level. So from our view, equals is the best way. We give the most points for that. But then when we're walking around a class and we see someone starting their formulas with at, we find they generally, on average, weaker than someone who starts with a plus. We don't see too many people starting with a negative, but it is a viable option. So we don't give any points for that. So we find that one question, actually, it's not just a yes, you know, no, you don't. It's how do you start? And it just indicates something. I can't say why. Normally the plus and at, it's much older users that maybe haven't kept up to date, etc. But we've just found that by using our experience, it means that a question, which would normally just be a question, you get a yes, no, right, wrong type thing, actually adds a little bit of value. So you'll see we've done quite a bit of that. The weighting is quite important. Then actually we found that what is of interest is there's a whole bunch of question types that we think people must not bother with. Okay. If you've got 100 questions, no problem. Put in as many fillers as you want. But when you limit it to 20, you've got to be a little bit careful. So these are the questions we avoid always. So firstly, the whole, what is this called in Excel? Okay, so why is that relevant? If you gave me a test of this and you made the MCQ answers a little bit confusing, I'd probably fail this. We don't see any relevance to it. We don't think it helps anyone. And yeah, we don't see any point in it. Also, the next thing we don't see much point is where is the sort button? Where is the what if button? Again, in the current environment, some people right click, some people like shortcuts. Does it really matter enough whether a person remembers it to waste a question on it? So if someone gets this question right, does it really say they know how to do sorting and they know the risks with it? If they get it wrong, maybe they just don't remember it. Maybe it's just not the way that they look at things. So as an example, the risk of this type of question as well, we built our Power Query course, finished recording that night, went to sleep, woke up, Windows updated, the Power Query buttons had moved around. So you'll be very careful with these type of things. If someone doesn't know where they are, does it really mean that they aren't advanced? And we are finding, I don't know, Daniela, how you're finding it, but lots more people using Mac, Excel for the Mac. And when we're trying to help them, now because we use Windows, we are struggling to say, oh, go to this menu. That's where the button is. So if we do live sessions there. So again, we don't think it shows actually skill level at all. It's got no bearing on it, and we avoid it. And then you've got obviously Windows and even Google Sheets. Let's be honest, it's actually fairly close to Excel, and an advanced Excel user actually should be fairly advanced Google Sheets. There's just a few functions. So does it really matter if they don't know where the sort button is? So these are these two questions: what is this called, and where is this button? They fill a question. So you'll see if you go, that's what the QR code is. Go to one of our blog posts, go right to the bottom, and you'll see there's a fun quiz. And basically, they fill a questions. They're more, do you know it's over here? It's more, you watch a YouTube video, it's more a learning thing. We don't think it's actually tells you anything about skill level. So maybe slightly more controversial then, we never ask, what is the shortcut for? Okay, so you ask the question, what is the shortcut for insert a row in Excel? Now, you can use the ribbon, you can right click, there's Control-Shift+, Alt-LR, and who knows what else is available there. If you ask me this question, I wouldn't get it right. So inserting rows is not something that I do often enough, so I just right click on it. And I don't really see the benefit of knowing that shortcut. Before I even finish asking the question in Google, I'll have my answer. So the question is more, does the person actually understand if you insert a row, what happens? What happens to the formulas? What is the shortcut for? For me is not relevant. Which is the only way, the correct way? Now, I know there's a lot of people that believe shortcuts save you tons of time. So that's what the QR code is. We've written a post on what we think is the shortcut fallacy. And just one of the aspects there, I keep getting told how much time you save and how fast it is. But we'd expect, if it's so fast, we'd expect to save ourselves 4 hours a day. And when you do some of the maths, you see you need 6 shortcuts a minute for 4 hours straight to actually save anything. So we don't think it's important, and then hence we actually don't ask the questions. Okay. Now, maybe this one, and I know in some of the LinkedIn posts, there were some comments on this, but do we test new functions as they are released? Okay. Now, for me, there are very few genuinely new capabilities in Excel. Okay, so not functions, capabilities. Very few of the functions that are new, you couldn't have done previously. It was a bit harder. You maybe had to use a few functions. You had to get quite fancy. But actually, the capability itself is not there. So XLOOKUP is nice, but we could have done it with match index, VLOOKUP. And there's one or two nicer things, and it reduces some risks. But it's not actually a brand new capability. All the dynamic array formulas, they're nice, but with fancy footwork around name ranges and offsets, you could have done a unique, you could have done a filter. And often I think the dynamic arrays are just pivot tables that you don't have to refresh. So maybe formula text is one that I think, oh, that's quite nice. It would have been quite hard to do before it. So why is that important? Is if you ask someone an XLOOKUP question versus the equivalent VLOOKUP question, if they don't get the XLOOKUP question right, so it could mean, okay, they don't know lookup logic, they've never heard of VLOOKUP, any of the lookups, therefore they should attend a beginner or intermediate course. Or maybe they're the most advanced VLOOKUP user in the world. They've just been so busy, they haven't heard about XLOOKUP, they haven't updated themselves to it. So them getting that wrong will give you they're weak, but they're actually not. And remember, if you know VLOOKUP, you'll learn XLOOKUP quickly. It's probably 10 minutes on YouTube and you know what it is. Having said that, however, XLOOKUP will become standard at some point. I just find that at the moment, if you ask XLOOKUP, a lot more people get it wrong, not because they aren't advanced, but because they just haven't heard of it. They haven't had time, their version of Excel, whatever it is. So at some point, there's going to be a switch over where you should ask XLOOKUP.
Yeah, it's just that it's not available for certain. I don't know if Microsoft's going to make it available for every version. So until that happens.
Correct,
yeah.
And that's the problem. And so a lot of and actually the real issue there is in our consulting practice, we've used XLOOKUP. We're very wary of using XLOOKUP. We've used it once because we thought, oh, that's a nice time to use XLOOKUP. Sent it to the person. Guess what? They had the wrong version, and we had to go back and use, I think, lookup, not even VLOOKUP, lookup to achieve the same thing. So you can be very careful. It's new, it's sexy, and I keep up to date with it. But does that differentiate a proper advanced user who knows how to build a model, who knows how to avoid errors, but they just haven't kept up to date? So the whole point is, don't punish an advanced Excel user because they're not using the latest. Just other areas to refrain from, and there might be some financial models pulling their hair out. So VBA, for me, it's a programming language. It's not something you can easily test, in my view, in 20 multiple choice questions. And will they actually get it right? If VBA is important to you, let them do a skills assessment test. Make sure if they're going to do VBA, they must be at least intermediate to advanced. And then sit them in the room, show them the file that you're worried about, and actually make them work. It's just too wide. And from my point of view, to me, it looks like Microsoft is moving away from VBA. So to me, it doesn't actually necessarily show an advanced user at all.
That was one of the
questions.
Range was, do you include VBA in the test, or is it not?
So no, not at all. Simply because from our point of view, so firstly, I don't love VBA. In fact, I've got a colleague, he does all the VBA, but in order for me to ask him to do something, I spend hours rather figuring out if I can do it via formula. More just because it's robust. People can see it. It's not a black box. Whereas I find, we get lots of queries. The person left the company, it's VBA, that's it. It just stops dead. It's very hard to understand. So, and a good VBA user should actually be able to answer all the advanced questions we ask anyway. So we have had some cases. We've had a VBA person use VBA to work out, to create a formula that turns a date into the last day of the month. But there's a formula that does it. And so we do find sometimes VBA people, because they can do anything, they don't even think, can Excel do it another way? Just straight into code. And anyway, so that's just it's quite a personal view. Similar to named ranges. Because we did lots of financial model reviews, we often found problems in named ranges. So we don't think it's a good test. If someone gets a named range question wrong, maybe they just don't use name ranges. And we don't use name ranges too much. So if you ask more advanced name range questions, again, I wouldn't get it right, but when I need it, I can use it. So again, it's not something that should punish someone because they don't know it, because it's very opiniony. Similar with Power Query, Power Pivot, Power Map. At the moment, they're magnificent tools. Power Query is probably the best thing that Excel has ever done. But can you ask the question, I want that person, I want to see that they understand Excel and they understand the whole issue around cleaning data. And if they've come up with a way and they understand how to do it in Excel, the move to Power Query is quite easy. So I would rather not test them at the moment, because I don't think I'm still amazed at how many people, when I say, can you see there's a get and transform, they've never seen it or anything like that. Daniela, are you still there? No, sorry. Yeah, okay. So those are the things I think you should refrain from testing. Now, if any of these are important to you, I do think it's actually ask them. So I know in one of the chats, someone mentioned that they test the person on offset. Now, offset is a function that if you're advanced, you'll learn it, but you may not know it already. And I can see Danielle, and you can see why. So some people love offset, some people don't. But now if you ask the offset question, a Danielle trained person is going to fail, but they could be super advanced, but they just were told, don't do it, don't learn it, etc. So we're a bit wary about that. But if they're important, first, get your 100 people, narrow them down to 10, and then ask them your particular questions in an environment or specific focus on them. So if those are all the questions not to ask, then what should we be asking? So a lot of our questions, you'll see it's about understanding. And actually, in our mind, it's experience in using Excel. Okay, so we're avoiding this book knowledge versus real life knowledge. So the type of things you'll see is what happens to a cell or a formula when you insert a row, insert a column, etc. Why did Excel not get the right answer? What is wrong with the date in Excel? Why is it not sorting, etc.? What we find is with lots of use, Excel users tend to get to the same understanding. So maybe we don't use the same functions, but we all know that, well, from my point of view, structure is critical. You must make sure you copy your formula across left to right. Be very careful about inserting rows. And those understandings come from experience, from working on a Friday night because something went wrong and then you realize it was some silly mistake you've made. So that's what we actually trying to get at. So for us, we try and test on what most people would know. So let's call them lowest common functions that everyone should know. So VLOOKUP at the moment, if functions, lots of dollar absolute and relative reference questions, because we find that's one of our key questions, is the difference between an advanced user and an intermediate user is often, do they understand the dollar signs? You know, so someone, they're using fancy functions, but because they don't understand the dollar signs, you see them building this formula 100 times. That one extra step for us is quite important as a differentiator. Do you really want to miss out on an advanced user because they don't do the things the way you want to? And we think it's a waste. And actually getting to our point right at the beginning about enjoying finding errors and understanding how, we find it's a great way to tell experience versus book learning. So everyone learns how to do VLOOKUP, but do they understand why it didn't work? You know, do they understand that a space at the end causes a problem? That is experience versus what your book learning is. Now, having said all of that, there's job type exceptions. So again, before is nice, you're a nice intermediate, advanced, etc. But the reality is Excel is massive and different jobs require different skill Excel knowledge. So ideally, all this should, the problem is this is always practical. So we've actually had cases, I'm going to show you some of our the questions on what do you do in Excel, where we've said, manager, please tell us what you think people do. And they come with reporting and charting. And when you ask the staff, what do you actually spend half your day doing? They're actually spending it doing data cleanup. So actually understanding what people do is quite important, but actually quite hard. You can't really sit next to everyone. So as a result, in part of the skills assessment questionnaire is 20, how often do you do this? And again, because we love them, we've set up a little spider diagram. It's not compulsory. The clockwise thing is still relevant, and we've split it into people clean data, people do analysis and manipulation, there's reporting, and there's decision modeling. And all the questions try and feed into these, because data cleaning or data scrubbing, no one admits to doing it, but actually we think it's the most important, it's the most used part of Excel. Data analysis is now VLOOKUP up and joining databases together, making things work, maybe doing a bit of analysis. Reporting is the dashboarding and management reporting that all managers seem to think that's the problem. So they send them on another charting course, another dashboarding course, when in reality, that's not the problem. And then decision modeling is financial modeling, forecasting, some engineering applications, that type of thing. And we try to get a sense of that. So slightly less, not everyone completes it, but that's currently what our database looks like. So most people seem to spend most of their day doing things that are, in our terminology, data cleanup. Okay, so because the way the questions work is they say, do you ever need to do this? You know, change this, lots of gaps in the cells, and filling gaps to proper report. So it doesn't ask you to do data cleaning because no one admits it, but it actually gives you that type of analysis. So again, just based on the job specific questions. So yes, it's better to have a focused question based on job type. The difficulty is this job type, you know, short of sitting next to everyone and saying, what do you actually do? It's hard. Even managers tend to not know what their staff is doing. The questions for data cleaning should be different from financial modeling, but again, you need to know what the person actually does. As I mentioned, we always work in a clockwise direction, which means that the decision modeler, in the last part of the whatever it's 9 o'clock person, we expect that person to know all the others. So most people tend to build up, they know data cleaning, then analysis, etc. And again, it's a bit of a bugbear of ours, but we think data cleaning is what most people do, and it would solve most of their problems instead of spending 7.5 hours cleaning and half an hour reporting, if they could do half an hour cleaning, 7.5 hours analyzing, thinking about which chart works, etc. So just in conclusion, I know it's about 1:45 now. Personally, advanced Excel, very undefined, but unfortunately, it's difficult to get away from that wording. Okay, there's just no way. Everyone wants that, and there's no real clear definition. I do think skill levels can be assessed via MCQ type questionnaire, but there's a lot of things you need to do. So use the same quiz, so you got a benchmark of the purposes. Intermediate may actually be okay, and we often advise people, if you want to test for a new job, first test your current staff, figure out what they are, because we often have people saying we want an advanced user. When we test the department, actually everyone's intermediate. So just that benchmarking is quite useful. And what I suppose the most important thing is the actual questions that give you the correct answers, you must carefully think about it. It's like a personality quiz. It seems strange, some of the questions asked, but somehow all so we do find that there's a lot of focus on new functions, new features, when actually it doesn't really matter. If the person doesn't understand why you ever want a unique list of items, the fact that they know the unique formula is irrelevant. Rather go back to pivot tables and get that an understanding there. And then obviously specific jobs do require different Excel skill levels. We can take some questions now, but just 2 QR codes here on the left-hand side. When our skills site is ready, if you're interested, just click on that. It'll create a draft email and you can send it to us and we'll inform you. And as I said, we've got a YouTube channel and you're welcome to subscribe to it or visit. So yeah, any other questions, comments?
Thank you. I know a couple of people had some problems using QR codes. I think maybe it's a location thing.
That's fine.
I'm going to send a link in the
Perfect.
Recording will go out tomorrow. We do have a couple of questions. Stephen wants to know, what do you mean by a super user? I think it's just more, what do you call a super user?
Yeah, so for me, it's a super attribute as opposed to a super user. So what we try to do is, so a lot of people, they'll learn how to do a tool and they'll learn how to do a function. But actually, sometimes you understand that sometimes a tool works best, sometimes a function works best, and sometimes you combine them. So for us, a super user is people who can use that type of thing. They understand when a tool works and sometimes combining them. And actually, probably it's more to do with you're a super user when you've built VLOOKUP, you've had the problems, you've figured out what can go wrong, you know how errors happen. So you're actually moving more now to understanding how to build a good model, which is less about did you use this function or that function, but did you structure it correctly? Do you understand flags? Without using these words, we're trying to pull out of people, have you actually understood what can go wrong in Excel and come up with a solution to it? Because we do find, if you look at all these financial modeling best practice, how to do it, what they suggest may differ, but fundamentally it's always the same. Good structure, building error checks, and that's the type of stuff that I think just pure experience, you get to that. How you get there is different, but you do get to that. So that to me is a super user.
I know I always say to people, when they come on my training course, because I don't really teach Excel, but it's hard to be a good financial modeler without knowing really good Excel. So I do tend to, by default you learn Excel, but I said it's not an Excel course. It's about the use of Excel in a modeling context or a dashboard context or a budgeting and forecasting context, because it's really about how you put those functions and tools together and make good use of them. I think that's is what you're saying.
Agreed.
We have a question from Anne about is there a time limit for the assessment?
So it's a very good question. Not in this case, because remember, it is this one was built more about training. So it was kind of, be honest, take as much time as you want, but why do you need much time unless you search in Google for the answer? Having said that, though, when it comes to, and that's why we think recruitment agencies shouldn't really use it, because you can just imagine how easy it is to score well on this thing when you've got all the time in the world. It's at your comfort of your own home. So time limits, we do include them in the new dedicated skills assessment, because there is a benefit to working a little bit under pressure, but it's just not in this particular one. just because of how it was set up. And as always, it wasn't built with, it was built with Excel. So it's Excel converted to HTML. So it's not the prettiest thing, but obviously the new assessment will work on that, and they will have time limits.
I mean, it's interesting what you say about Google, because yeah, I mean, you should know stuff straight off the top of your head, but really, you know, in the real world, you know, quite often I say, oh, I know how to do this formula. In fact, I was doing some pretty curly Power Query formulas today, and I was like, oh, what is that formula again? I can't remember, you know, and I just Google stuff, and you know, that is partly how we use Excel nowadays, is being able to know what you're looking for and find it on Google. So
exactly, and that's why it's quite important for us that concept of tipping point is quite important. Literally, there's a tipping point where from there you understand it enough, you'll ask Google the right question, and then you'll get the right answer. So I agree fully with it. That's why I don't think there's a point in asking someone, do you show me how the unique formula works? If they haven't heard of it, you know, half an hour later they can be experts. It's as simple as that.
How are you going to use it in the context in which it's going to really make a difference?
Correct, the capability.
Okay, well, I don't think we have any other questions. It's called Google Fu, like Kung Fu in the use of Excel, most Google every hour. Fantastic. All right, I think, was there anything else you wanted to mention, Adrian? Otherwise, I think we're pretty much come to the end.
Yeah, no, that's all from our side.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
I will send out a link to the recording, and also all of these fantastic links that you have provided for us. And if people subscribe to your newsletter, I guess they will find out when that skill site is ready, and I'm sure everybody
correct as well. Yeah,
very helpful.
Great, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Adrian, and hope to see everybody again.